Hey guys, before we get started, let me tell you about Spotify for Podcasters. It is a great app that I use to actually put together my podcast episodes. I record them there and get them edited and trimmed and such. And then from there, I can actually put them on any podcasting platform that I may want to. So if podcasting is something that you feel you might be interested in, check out Spotify for Podcasters. Now, let's get on with the program. Hey, welcome back to the Calloused podcast, and I'm not alone today. I've been on a roll of actually getting to talk with other people for my podcasts, and I got a buddy who is currently in town, but if I blink, he'll be gone, so I'm going to try to keep my eyes open for this one. Josh with the Manna Project. Josh, how you doing?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yep, wonderful. So what is the Manna Project exactly?
So the Manna Project is a mission work. Essentially, we train guys overseas how to preach and how to farm. And it goes much deeper than that, but that's kind of the upper level thing. That's the elevator pitch.
That's the elevator pitch?
Yeah.
That's a great elevator pitch. Obviously, we've gotten to see presentations and everything like that because our congregation supports the work. It's been very interesting to see how you guys approach missionary work as opposed to other people that approach. Like, it's a very much different approach from what other people do for missionary work. You guys train people and kind of like help them be self-sufficient in a way, yeah?
That's exactly what we do. And I mean, there are right and wrong ways to do things, obviously, when you look at scriptural examples and biblical patterns. But a lot of mission work, in mission work, a lot of times there's not a right or wrong way. There are just different ways to do things. And the Manna Project, we figured out that we need to do things differently. There are a lot of great brotherhood works that go on all over the world that are awesome. And we like to help those when we can. But when we start looking around the national picture of the Church of Christ, the Lord's Church, we see that we're losing congregations every year. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 congregations a year disappear. When you look at that, what happens to mission work? If we're losing 300 congregations a year, and each one of those congregations support a congregation overseas, then when congregation A in America folds, then congregation B in Africa folds. They're supporting two congregations, then congregation B in Africa and C in India fold, because if that guy's not getting money in from the States and from American brethren, then he can't afford to preach. There's no income coming in, so he stops preaching, he goes into town, gets a job. And now there's nobody preaching at that congregation. Now there's no congregation. So if we're losing 300 congregations a year domestically, we're losing 600 or 900 or 1,200 congregations a year internationally. And that's not real sustainable. So how do we keep these guys in the field preaching without having to rely on American dollars? That's the problem we were trying to solve. A lot of this came, our director, Gage Coldwater, was teaching a class in Nepal, just a Bible class and a preaching school for these folks in Nepal. And they said, we're glad we know the Bible, but how do we feed our families? You know, the congregation where I'm at has 7 people, and they can't afford me when I get out of school. How do I feed my family? And it's this whole idea of the Manna Project, where we're teaching guys to be self-sufficient, to provide for their own food. In a lot of ways, sometimes it's market value, sometimes it's monetary, but most of what we do is agriculture-based. Because if these guys, we teach them a skill. You know, they learn how to weld, or they learn how to do carpentry. Yeah, this guy may be able to make a broom or 10 brooms a day. But if you can't sell that, what do you do with it? Whereas if we teach this guy how to grow, cucumbers and squash and okra and corn, and, if he can't sell that, then he can at least eat that. So that's kind of what we're doing.
It's a wonderful thought. It's in ways a basic thought, but it's profound at the same time because, like we said, it's different from what other people are doing. And the fact that you're teaching them to feed themselves and their families, and not just them, because, I mean, a village would benefit from it as well. It's amazing. And the fact that we're losing 300 nationally and potentially 6, 9, 1,200 internationally, that's just an incredible, just daunting number. It's scary.
It is. It's real scary. And as Christians, it ought to scare us. As Christians, those kind of numbers ought to put evangelism at the top of our plates. We ought to be sharing the gospel with all the folks that we know, all the folks that we care about. Because if we love them here, we ought to love them enough to try to see that they get into heaven. And that's, obviously a motivating factor. We do a lot of evangelism through our schools overseas. So we run preaching schools in Africa. We run a resource center in Nepal. We're trying to do a resource center in Latin America. Hopefully in Panama, we're looking into some options. And the difference is that is our preaching schools are 2-year programs like a Memphis and East Tennessee or Brown Trail or Bear Valley kind of place where you go for 2 years and you live and you learn the Bible, and we add agriculture training with that. You know, these students are working on the farms. They're getting some agriculture education in the classroom on top of their biblical stuff so that they're prepared not just to preach and to serve a local congregation, but to provide for themselves, their families, their the folks in their congregation. In the resource center, it's different. We're teaching short classes all throughout the year. We've got a curriculum now on church growth and leadership that we can do month courses on, that we can get that in the hands of local preachers. So we're strengthening these congregations, but you can also come and learn how to produce rice. Maybe we have a week-long rice production class, a week-long beekeeping class, a 2-week class on elders, a 2-week class on evangelism, a 2-week class on, Bible study methods. Maybe it's a week-long class on motorcycle repair or welding or whatever these folks need in that specific, in that specific climate and environment to be sufficient and to provide for themselves. What we find overseas in a third world country is that 90% of your income goes to food. In America, we spend a lot of money on food. We're eating out a lot of times. But our food bill is way less than our mortgage. Our food bill is on par usually with a car payment or something every month. We have different sets of priorities, different sets of bills. If we can give somebody the skills to grow 90%, to grow or raise 90% of their budget, and they have enough left over they can take to market, well, now they've provided for that 10 or 15% of monetary needs that they have, to buy things you can't grow on the ground or you can't raise from an agricultural standpoint. If we can teach them to do that, then they're completely 100 self-sufficient. They have everything they need in order to survive because they don't have the same environmental hazards to finance that we do. They're not paying cable bills. They're not paying mortgages and car pay, all this stuff that we think that we have to have in America, that we burden ourselves down, that we burden our congregations down with sometimes. In a lot of ways, it's much simpler. And let's give them the tools they need to thrive in that environment.
I don't even know what to say after all that. There was so much. And the one thing, though, that you brought up that I remember whenever you and I actually had a conversation about it before that I thought was really interesting was the motorcycle repair class. But it makes sense because, and you know this statistic, but that's what most of their travel is done with, right?
Right. A lot of folks in third world developing countries, they don't have cars. If they can afford a mode of transportation, it's usually a motorcycle. They may have a bicycle. A lot of folks, ride sharing is hugely popular, but there's no app on their phone. There's just some guy coming down the road and you just jump on his car and you ride to wherever he's going. That's the way it works. They will put routinely 2, 3, 4, 5 people sometimes on a motorcycle and go to church or go to the store. I've seen 2 guys and 4 100-pound feed sacks on a motorcycle. He's using it like a truck. And when you use it in that kind of ways, outside of its intended scope, you're going to break your motorcycles down. You're going to have automotive issues. And so in Nepal, we asked, what can we help you with? And one of the answers were, we need help fixing our motorcycles. We're burning up our clutches. What can we do to fix this? And what we want to do is help people thrive in the environment where they're at. So it's like, all right, maybe we can find somebody who is qualified to come in and teach motorcycle repair. Because if that is one of your major costs every year is fixing the clutch, and we can teach you how to do that, then you're more self-sufficient than you were beforehand.
It's very life-changing stuff for sure, because what you're doing is being able to keep them focused on being able to preach by cutting down their other costs, because now they're self-sufficient. There was one thing that you brought up recently, too, that I found really interesting. I can't remember everything about it, but it was, I think your, boss Gage was showing people the differences in Milo from like over here to over there, like the different strands or whatever.
So, yeah, we were working with an agriculture university in Tanzania, down the road from our school a ways, and just looking at the Milo that they were producing there is not nearly as efficient as the Milo we produce in States. And there are some things you have to look at, like ground conditions and other things, but where they're at, they could produce that. And they were interested in partnering with us if we could bring seed over to let them test it out. And then with that, they will let our students come over and partner with them, audit some classes, do some field trip kind of things, so that they see commercial production. It's important to understand when we talk about agriculture overseas, everybody's already engaged in agriculture. They're just not doing it to the level they could. It is not our job to go over there and to mandate they do things differently. In some ways, they have a better grasp of local agriculture than we do. We go and we do soil samples and we test, and we figure out what can be grown there. In America, we go out and test our soil, and if it's not what we want to be, then we throw down lime and fertilizer and all this stuff to condition the soil to get it to where we want. And when you drive down the interstate and you see those rows of just, perfect rows of corn or soybeans, and they're planted super close together, we can do that here because of all the things we're putting in the soil. You can do that overseas, but it's prohibitive. The local preacher's not going to be able to pay for the fertilizer, the chemicals to make that happen. So what we do is we teach natural soil composition. We teach soil chemistry, soil biology. If you can maintain your soil and not dig it up all the time, minimize your impact in the soil, then it retains better soil chemistry. All the nutrients are staying in there. We teach successive planting. We teach planting where overseas they're wasting a lot of space. They're planting plants 3 to 4 feet apart, where in America, just even in a home garden, you plant them 8 to 10 inches apart. We're taking termite mounds and reducing them to just dirt so that we have free natural fertilizer to put in stuff. We can take snail shells, African snail shells, crush them up for calcium supplements for tomatoes and those kind of things. So that we're giving these guys an awesome opportunity to be proactive in their financial well-being. Because I don't want to necessarily give a guy a trade like welding and then also have him preach, because he's going to be covered up welding, all day long as long as it's daylight. And then he still has to see to his family, and he's trying to prepare his sermons. Farming you can do for a few hours in the morning, a few hours in the afternoon. And it gives you a lot of time in order to be able to devote it to your family, to your congregation, to the work of the church you need to be doing. And then when you need to go visit Sister Betty Lou, who's feeling bad, you just stop by the garden and you pick her something. You take her some eggs, you take her a chicken, and then you've got this outreach opportunity and this benevolent opportunity as well.
The benevolence thing I didn't even think of, because I always, since I've heard of the Manna projects, my thought was geared almost completely towards you're helping the preacher, be sustainable to where he can, do his focus is preaching still. But yeah, I didn't even think about the whole part of it of, sister so-and-so up the road's sick. I'm going to, grab, a couple of stalks of corn or whatever, ears of corn, I guess, not so much stalks, but yes. Go up there and, give them to her and talk with her and stuff. I never thought about it from that part of it being, yet another outreach. So that's amazing.
It can make a big difference in these people's lives. Most of our students are successful enough. They're not just producing food for their families, but there's enough for folks in the congregation. It's not like they can supply the entire village, but, they could spare a cucumber, or they could spare, some corn because they're doing this. And it creates an outreach opportunity for evangelism. When you go visit somebody in the village who's hurting, well, here, we showed up and we brought some food, and can we pray for you? Can we study with you? It makes a difference that way.
How long has Manna Project been around?
So Manna Project started in 2010. It was original in Vidor, Texas, because that's where Gage was at the time. Gage Coldwater is our director, founder of this whole thing. And it started with his desire to help these guys be self-sufficient. From Vidor, it moved to Oklahoma when Gage and his family as a preacher moved there. And then just recently, the entire work has been moved to the Forest Hill Church of Christ in Memphis. That's where the Memphis School of Preaching is at. Those elders oversee our entire work, and it's been a blessing to us to have this kind of transition. They are well invested in seeing this work succeed.
That's fantastic, because Forest Hill is known for doing exterior work outside of their own walls, and they were overseeing, I don't know if they still are or not, so I don't want to speak out of turn, but I know they were overseeing the Scattered Abroad Network in their podcast that they put out.
Yep, they're currently overseeing. So that eldership oversees the Memphis School of Preaching, the Scattered Abroad Network, and the Manna Project right now.
That is those works alone are a lot in our brotherhood. Yep. So that's impressive, and hats off to the Forest Hill Church of Christ for spreading the word the way they do.
We are blessed to be there. Those elders are incredibly forward thinking, and it's been a blessing to us to have that and to have that kind of level of encouragement. And then there is some doors that are open just because people are familiar with that congregation and the works that they're doing, and they're more apt to hear some word from the Manna Project.
I can imagine, not necessarily name dropping, but being like, hey, when you're approaching about wanting to come and, share what the Manna Project does with the congregation, hey, I'm with the Manna Project and yada, yada, yada. They might be like, and then you go, Forest Hill Church of Christ, do what?
Exactly. There are folks that are familiar with the work that the Forest Hill is doing, and we're just blessed to be a part of that and all the opportunities that it brings.
Any particular opportunities that you could elaborate on, or everything's still in the works?
Well, there's always something in the works. We have a lot of trips planned for this year. In next Saturday, so about 10 days, my wife and I will be traveling to Mexico with a group from Forest Hill. So it's more or less a Forest Hill Church group that's going to Mexico. And as the Manna Project, we're kind of going along to kind of help facilitate that. But we'll be in Mexico for a week doing a lot of evangelism, door knocking, seminars at night, that kind of thing. We're excited about that. We're trying to get trips to Nepal, Tanzania, and Uganda all on the books this year, as well as some trips to Panama and maybe Costa Rica. So there are a lot of opportunities that way. And then we spend a lot of time on the road. You mentioned when we first started this that I'm here in town right now. And tomorrow may not be, is because we're on the road a lot, talking about the Manna Project, scheduling opportunities to speak and raising support and those kind of things. So there's always something like that we're doing that's in the works.
So I know that, first off, that's a lot for this year, and hopefully you guys can pull all that off, because that's a lot to pull off. But I know, what was it, last year you went to Nepal and you went to Africa, but I don't think you were able to visit both Tanzania and Uganda.
No.
Were you?
So we spent 3 weeks a little over in Nepal. We spent about a month in Tanzania, and the goal was to get into Uganda. But the problem with international travel is you're traveling internationally, and there's all sorts of complications. So we were planning to go to Uganda, had set some plans in order to do that, when Uganda last year outlawed homosexuality. And we appreciate the stance that they made, maybe not in the way that they made it, but America as a whole said, you can't do that. That's a violation of human rights. So America as a nation sanctioned Uganda. Uganda's response in retaliation was to stop issuing visas to Americans. So that stopped our trip to Uganda pretty quickly. Now, we did have a couple of guys who had previously traveled to Uganda. This would have been my first trip. And because they had been there, it took months worth of calling and kind of finessing the situation. They were able to finally get in. I hope to be able to go, that things have calmed down a little bit. But that's the kind of things you deal with when you work internationally. We had a trip to Nepal plane in January, and our airline prices quadrupled on us. They went from something that was feasible to something that very much was not feasible. So let's change. We want to get into Panama. Let's go to Panama this winter. We had dates picked for Panama, 2 separate trips planned, when environmental protests broke out and shut the entire country down. Our contacts in Panama says, do not come. You can't come into the country. And that's how we ended up in Mexico next week.
That's wild to go from just planning a trip to, so the environmental protests are so bad you can't come, because with it being an environmental protest, you would think it would be, how do you say, mostly peaceful?
Yes.
So that's so baffling. I feel like there's quite a bit still left to talk about, but it's like, well, which way do I want to go? So do you have another trip outside of like Mexico and Panama planned for this year, like already on the books then?
No, there's nothing on the books right now. We're kind of looking at everybody's schedules, but we do plan to be in Nepal and somewhere in Africa this year. So there are 5 of us who work full time with the project. One of us is on the road overseas every couple months. And we try to travel in groups, a pair of guys, just because it's safer. A little more oversight, a little safety there. And a group of us, or one of us, is usually overseas every couple months. We visit every place that we work at least twice a year, if at all possible. Sometimes we only get there once. But we never send money. We never send support somewhere that we don't actually go and verify how it's being spent. We're huge on accountability. We do send money overseas, but none of it goes to local preachers. None of it goes to our preaching students. It goes to provide for the facility and the instructors in our schools and our resource centers. We're providing this environment where people can come in and learn without actually giving them a stipend to be there.
Which is profound because, again, it's kind of outside of the box thinking when it comes to missionary work. There's some really cool things about Nepal that I hadn't thought of before until you went there. And basically, if I remember this correctly, like the country's basically broken into two different regions, right? Like there's the mountains region and then there's like a more jungle region, right?
Well, if you look at it north and south, yeah, it's definitely northern Nepal is Himalaya mountains, gorgeous. And then southern Nepal is bordering India. It's very tropical, very jungle. It's beautiful in its own way. But when you look at Nepal, it's broken into districts like any other country or like the Americas. We're broken into, states here in America. But you have eastern Nepal, kind of central Nepal, west, and what they call far west Nepal. From kind of a geographical region, our school is in eastern Nepal, kind of borders Bangladesh. India kind of covers it on three sides, east, west, and south. Tibet is north. But just a little skinny spot of India on the east and the west sides. So your Bangladesh is more or less the eastern border for Nepal, whereas you get into Pakistan and some other stuff on the west side. Our resource center is in eastern Nepal. Kathmandu, a lot of congregations in that area is in central Nepal. And we're doing now a lot of evangelism in western and far western Nepal. There was an entire denominational congregation that was converted in far west Nepal last month or the month before that, about 6 weeks ago.
That's incredible.
Yep.
That's mind-blowing that something like that happened, and makes me think of Acts 2, brethren, what must we do?
Exactly.
And that's wonderful. God is good. Speaking of our brethren over in Nepal, there is one in particular whose story is just fascinating. Can you share a little bit about his story with us?
So we ran into this brother in in Kathmandu, and his name is Surcha Tamang. So his name is Surcha. He is from the Tamang people. And he is from the Tipling area, which doesn't mean a lot to a lot of folks, but just know that's up in the mountains. And Surcha was a Sherpa in his younger days. The guys that put the packs on, their backs and carry all your stuff up Mount Everest. A mountain guide kind of guy. That's what he was. And he was a Hindu. And this goes back to the late 60s, early 70s. And sure, Surcha was in his village. There was a disease going around. A lot of folks that were sick. And when you're Hindu, that means that there is a demon in your village. There's an evil presence. And you should offer sacrifices to the Hindu gods in order to appease them and make this disease go away. Now, from a Western standpoint, we understand that doesn't happen, that you need things like antibiotics to make these things go away. But when you're Hindu, that is the traditional view. So they were literally making the streets run with blood, sacrificing chickens and goats, bulls, those kind of things, in order to appease these Hindu spirits. And this guy talking to folks, he ran into a man who said, hey, there is a God named Jesus who casts out demons, and maybe you should look into him. And this guy bumped into somebody who was a nominal Christian and said that there is a man in Kathmandu you should see. So back in the late 60s, early 70s, the infrastructure in Nepal wasn't even what it is now. And we would not think of it as a whole lot as Americans going over it now. But it's much improved to what it was. So it was a several-day trip to get from where he was at into Kathmandu, where he ran into a man by the name of Ram, who was one of the first Christian converts of the Lord's Church in Nepal. And that's in the 60s and 70s. It's only going back, 50 years now, 50 or 60 years. So he ran into him, stayed there with him about a week, was converted, went back up, and they call Surcha, his nickname is the man who converted 5 villages. He went back up to his home above Tipling where he lived, converted his family, converted his village. Then in turn, that led to other villages. There are several thousand Christians in Nepal based on what this one man did. And for about a period of 10 years, there were no Hindus on that side of the mountain. Everybody had converted to the truth. Then some Hindus had moved back in. They found out about it. They spent the next considerable amount of time persecuting Searcher and his family. That's right. I have a companion here who has joined me for some pets. So we are talking to Penelope. Do you want to hear about Searcher? Of course you do. Let's talk. So Searcher is confronted by these Hindu folks. And on 3 separate occasions, he makes a trek back to Kathmandu to meet with his legal government representative. Essentially, he's meeting with his congressman, who proceeds to give him a piece of paper saying that they can no longer persecute you. That they can't persecute you, that you have a right to be up there even though you're a Christian. So he takes this piece of paper 3 times to the Hindus. They tear it up. In this whole process, they have torn down his church building. They burnt down his house. They've chased him and his family out into the jungle parts. And he said literally we were living on mushrooms scavenged from the jungle. And he finally just walks up to him. He said there were 25 of these guys. And you can do whatever you want to me. You can kill me. You can do what you want. But I cannot quit my religion and I cannot quit my Jesus. He said, if you kill me, the blood that you shed will raise up more Christians. He said, I'm going to stand here for 5 minutes. You do whatever, but then we're going to go back to being faithful to God. And he looked these guys in the eyes for 5 minutes and just walked off. I mean, absolute incredible faithfulness. We like to talk about Revelation 2 and verse 10. To be faithful unto death, or to the point of death. This guy is living it out. And just an absolutely incredible story. He was an elder in the church for a long time there in Nepal. There were 2 elders at that congregation. One passed away, so obviously he has stepped down now. But just an absolutely incredible man. That story is actually, we interviewed him. It's on our website. You can go to mannafarm.org and click on the videos button. There's a ton of stuff there that you can watch, but search his videos is well worth a watch.
Definitely. I haven't watched the full story with him yet. I've heard you tell it a couple of times, and then the highlight videos that you have shared have been absolutely fantastic as well. But we don't only have brethren there. We also have brethren where you've been in Tanzania. Yep. I wanted to make sure I said the right one. I was like, wait, was it Uganda? And then I was like, no, I'm pretty sure that was the one that banned homosexuality that we had talked about.
That's right.
So there's a couple of young kids in Tanzania that have taught you Swahili. Yes?
They have tried to teach me Swahili. I have found that I am very bad at Swahili. I am okay in Spanish, not great in Nepali, and Swahili it's just different. But we have a couple of kids there that live on our campus in Tanzania. Tanzania is one of our full 2-year schools is at. So we have a couple of kids there. Sabana, who is the child of the lady who cooks for us. Super awesome little kid. Everything's always sunny. Everything's always bright. Got a smile that just lights up a room. And his buddy Charlie is there. He lives in our widow's home. We have a small home at the end of our property where we have some widows and this orphan child. And he's that way because when he was born, his mother had HIV. And if you know how that stuff contracts, he got it through the birth process. And so his mother is not able to care for him, so he comes and lives with us. And, we're able to help him do his medication and all those kind of things to help keep him safe. And, we're just so thankful that is not near the thing it was when we were growing up, in the 80s and early 90s. And, those things aren't nearly as dangerous as they used to be. We know they're still very serious, especially when you live in third world countries where access to medicine, affordability of medicine is a whole different ballgame.
It's an extremely different ballgame. I can't say from my own experience or anything like that, but I know we are extremely blessed here, and I know, the difference between us and a third world country. So I can't imagine do you have any figures on what the medicines cost for somebody who has HIV over in Africa is?
No, I don't. I don't have that kind of information on me, and we don't do a lot with medical with the Manna Project. I've done a lot of mission work when I was just full-time at the Arnold congregation, where we did tons of medical work in Jamaica that I oversaw. And some of the things we see there, that hospital stays are way cheaper. So we had a member of our congregation who was diabetic, had an episode while we were in Jamaica, had an overnight stay. He went to the ER, was admitted, spent a night in the hospital, got out. The total bill for that was $600 and some odd. So that's very cheap from an American standpoint. But now you have to understand, level of care was not quite to an American standard, but the affordability was. We had a man get hit by a truck in Uganda this past year, broke both legs, had a skull fracture, and I believe he broke his collarbone. He stayed in the hospital for several days. They made us pay the bill before he could leave. Imagine how full our hospitals in America would be if you had to pay in full before they let you leave.
I'm pretty sure Vanessa and I would still be there.
Yeah, that's exactly
Darren's
right.
birth.
We would too. So, I mean, not for Darren's birth, but we have to. So, but that entire hospital bill for his stay and all the treatment was $1,500 US. So sometimes the affordability of healthcare is better, even though the standards are less. But I know in Jamaica, medicine is prohibitively expensive. So, for example, we had a lady come into our clinic when we were working in Jamaica. She got bitten by a dog several months before, and it got infected. By the time we saw it, it was gangrenous, and we had to send her to the hospital for an amputation. Now, she was going to lose her foot. Because 3 months ago, whenever she was bit by the dog, she had a choice to make. I think she had like $15. A tube of Neosporin is $12. Chicken for dinner is $12. Which choice are we going to make? Or do I need to put medicine on my foot or food in my belly? So she decided to buy food. Every day for 3 months, she decided to buy food. And then we offered this free medical clinic a few months later. She comes in and sees us. And because the medicine was prohibitively expensive, and 88 cent a tube of Neosporin at Walmart is $12 in Jamaica, which is the same price. And I mean, you got to think, how much is a cheeseburger at Sonic these days? It's about $12. You know, are you going to buy food, or are you going to buy your medicine if you've got just enough? So it's those kind of decisions that people are making overseas all the time. You know, if we can give our students and the people who come through our resource centers the training they need to be more productive agriculturally to get the food that they need, then they're not going to have to make this decision of, I have a limited amount of money. Do I spend it on food or medication for my family? Because we're giving them the tools they need to provide for the food.
That's absolutely just fantastic. And I had totally forgotten about the guy that got hit by the bus. That's just, that was scary because I know there for a while you guys weren't sure if he was going to make it.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a little touch and go. And we've had a couple of medical emergencies overseas this year. And we've been able to help folks with that. Our school director in Tanzania, his young son was hit by a motorcycle, which is much more common than we would think of here in the States. And it was touchy for a little while, him and his friend, but they were both survived. You know, those kind of things necessarily aren't in the budget. You know, we do budget for some healthcare things, but there's some great brethren here who are able to help us take care of that. Because the money we do overseas, while we don't pay for students to be there, we do pay for logistics, and some of that is healthcare. If they need to see a doctor, go to the hospital while they're in school, you know, we help cover those costs. If it's excessive, there's always brethren here. You know, the brethren are incredible to step up for needs that we have like that are kind of outside of the norm.
As, you know, brethren should. It's kind of a benevolence thing. Like we're supposed to be there for each other, and not just financially, but, you know, emotionally and spiritually as well.
Paul said that we ought to do good unto all men, especially those of the household of faith, and that we ought to be helping to bear one another's burdens. And sometimes that's emotional, you know, sometimes that's financial. You know, we just need to be here for each other.
Indeed, we do. That would actually be a great segue into. We had planned a lesson, but I don't want to dive into it because I feel like we'll go another probably a half hour or so, and that might put you late to your next appointment. So I think Penelope hair is. It was even worse after I tried to fend it away. Penelope hair is everywhere. Unfortunately, my dog is shedding horribly, which I think I have mentioned in previous episodes before. But any closing things you want to add about the Manna Project?
No, man. We just want to appreciate you for having us out and being able to talk to these folks on the podcast. And, you know, if they have any questions or if they want to research this further, they can look us up. It's mannafarm.org. There are a lot of different Manna projects out there. Somebody asked me the other day, so why aren't y'all mannaproject.com? I said, because it was taken when we tried to get our website. So we are mannafarm.org, lots of information. Anybody that wants to can reach out to me. My email is just josh@mannafarm.org, and that's Manna with 2 N's, MANNA farm. And just reach out, contact us. We'd love to come and talk about the work, share what's going on overseas. We love when people get excited about the things that we're doing.
I actually learned the lesson the hard way about the Manna Farm and Manna Project thing, because I did go to mannaproject.com, and whenever it came up, I was like, that's the wrong one.
That is, yep. And we had one guy say, I didn't know you guys were Baptist. I'm like, well, we're not. He said, well, I saw your website. You saw the wrong website. So, yeah, just get to the right place and find us. And, you know, we love to talk about what we do, not in an egotistical way. But I thought about that when I said it. I said, well, that sounded bad. But we do. We love to talk about stuff that we're doing and engage people with it and just share how the Lord is blessing this work all over the world.
Absolutely. And God is good. And we definitely want to have you back on again sometime. Maybe later this year we'll talk about Mexico and maybe some other trips that you have along the way.
It'd be fantastic.
All right, Josh, thank you very much.